He moved to hit her, and she shattered his arm in front of 282 soldiers. It was just another Tuesday morning at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The kind of day that begins with the sharp crack of boots on asphalt, the low rumble of diesel engines warming up, and the distant echo of a bugle calling soldiers to formation. The sun had barely cracked the horizon, casting long shadows across the parade ground where 282 members of the 82nd Airborne Division stood at rigid attention, their faces set in the stoic mask of discipline, their bodies honed by years of training, deployment, and sacrifice. They were warriors, men and women who had walked through fire in Afghanistan, survived IED blasts in Iraq, and carried the weight of comrades lost in the dust of distant battlefields. They knew fear. They knew loss. They knew how to kill and how to endure. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared them for what happened next. Command Sergeant Major Daniel Rourke stepped forward, his chest puffed with the pride of a man who had spent 2 decades climbing the ranks, his medals glinting under the weak morning light like cold steel. He was a legend in the unit, a man whose name was whispered with reverence in the barracks, whose orders were obeyed without question, whose presence alone could silence a room of rowdy paratroopers. He was the embodiment of military authority, stern, unyielding, and feared, and he was about to become the most humiliated man in the history of Fort Bragg. His wife, Lieutenant Commander Elena Rourke, stood 10 paces behind him, her posture perfect, her eyes forward, her uniform crisp and immaculate. She was a naval intelligence officer, a graduate of Annapolis, decorated for her work in cyber operations and counterterrorism. She had spent 3 years embedded with special forces in the Middle East, decoding enemy communications that saved dozens of lives. She spoke 4 languages. She had earned her silver wings. She had survived ambushes, drone strikes, and the psychological toll of war. And yet, in the eyes of her husband, she was still just his wife. That morning, she had arrived 15 seconds late to formation. Not because she was lazy, not because she was disrespectful, but because she had been held up by a broken-down vehicle on the base shuttle. She had called ahead. She had sent a text. She had apologized in writing by 05:30 hours, but Daniel Rourke didn't care till he saw her step in a line. He saw the slight flush on her cheeks, not from exertion, but from the cold. He saw the way her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion. She had been up all night, analyzing encrypted signals from a rogue cell in Yemen. She had only slept 2 hours. She had missed breakfast. She had skipped her morning run. And to him, that was an insult. Lieutenant Commander Rourke, he barked, his voice cutting through the crisp air like a whip. You were 5 seconds late. Again. Elena didn't flinch. She didn't look at him. She kept her gaze straight ahead. Sir, I submitted a formal delay notification at 0528 hours. The shuttle malfunctioned. Don't give me excuses, he snapped. You're my wife. You're supposed to set an example, not drag the unit down with your incompetence. A murmur rippled through the ranks. Not because of the words soldiers heard worse every day, but because of the tone, the venom, the humiliation. He was publicly shaming her, in front of 282 men and women who had seen combat, who had buried their friends, who knew what real sacrifice looked like. Elena didn't respond. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, straight, silent, unbroken. Daniel stepped forward, and then he raised his hand. Not to correct her, not to gesture, not to point. He raised his hand, palm open, fingers spread, to strike her across the face. The entire formation froze and O1 moved. No one breathed. Even the wind seemed to pause in that suspended second. Time didn't just slow, it shattered. Elena didn't duck. She didn't flinch. She didn't scream. What she did next was so fast, so precise, so brutally efficient. It looked like something out of a movie, something choreographed, something trained. She pivoted on her left foot. Her right arm snapped upward in a single, fluid motion, elbow bent, wrist locked, forearm rotating. Not as a punch, not as a swing, but as a weapon calibrated by years of hand-to-hand combat training, by the brutal reality of close-quarters battle, by the instinct of a woman who had learned long ago that the only thing more dangerous than a man with a gun was a woman who had nothing left to lose. Her forearm connected with Daniel's outstretched wrist, not with force, but with precision. A crack, not a pop, not a snap. A shattered it echoed like a rifle shot across the parade ground. Daniel Rourke's arm, the radius and ulna, both snapped clean in two places. That he didn't scream, that he didn't cry out, that he didn't even fall. He just stopped. His hand hung there limp, twisted at an impossible angle, bones protruding through the skin like broken branches. Blood bloomed instantly, dark, thick, shocking against the khaki of his uniform sleeve. His face went white. His eyes bulged. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stared at his AS if it didn't belong to him, AS if it had betrayed him. The silence that followed was absolute. And birds chirped, and engines rumbled. And 1 move point 282 soldiers stood frozen. Their faces a mosaic of shock, horror, awe, and something deeper, something they hadn't felt in years, respect. Elena didn't look at him. She didn't look at her arm. She didn't look at the blood. She turned slowly, deliberately, and faced the formation. Her voice was calm, steady, clear. Command Sergeant Major Rourke attempted to assault his wife during a formal military formation. That is a violation of Article 128 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Assault. It is also a violation of the Army's zero-tolerance policy on domestic violence. And it is an affront to every soldier here who has ever been told to protect, to serve, to uphold the values we swear to defend. She paused. Her eyes swept across the ranks, not with anger, not with triumph, but with the quiet certainty of a woman who had spent her life fighting for justice in the darkest corners of the world. And now, she said, I'm going to call the Criminal Investigation Division. She reached into her uniform pocket, not for a phone, not for a weapon, but for a small, black notebook. She opened it, flipped to a page. Read aloud. 0603 hours. Incident report. Command Sergeant Major Daniel Rourke attempted to strike Lieutenant Commander Elena Rourke. She defended herself using a controlled, non-lethal martial arts technique known as Sodinage, a wrist lock derived from Aikido, designed to neutralize aggression without causing permanent injury. Unfortunately, due to the force and angle of his forward motion, combined with the fragility of his wrist structure under stress, a bilateral fracture occurred. She looked up. Medical personnel are required to respond immediately. I am requesting a full investigation. I'm also requesting that my husband be placed under immediate arrest pending review. She closed the notebook. Then, for the first time since the strike, she looked at him, and she said one word, now. The medics arrived in under a minute. They didn't need to ask what happened. They had seen it. They had heard it. They had felt it. One of them, a young E5 medic named Jenkins, had been in the front row. He later told reporters, I thought he was going to hit her. I thought she was going to cry. I thought she'd take it. But when she moved, I didn't even blink. I just watched. And when his arm broke, I felt like I'd seen God. Daniel Rourke was carried off the field on a stretcher, his arm immobilized in a splint, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. He tried to speak, to curse, to threaten, to command, but his voice cracked. He was wheeled away, his medals still gleaming, his reputation already crumbling. Elena stood there, alone, for 37 seconds, and one moved, and one spoke. Then, slowly, a single soldier stepped forward. Private First Class Maya Chun, 21 years old, from Ohio, had joined the Army after her father died in a domestic violence incident. She had never spoken about it, not even to her platoon. She walked to the front, and she saluted. Elena returned it. Then another soldier stepped forward, then another, and another. By the time the chaplain arrived, 174 soldiers had stepped forward, not in formation, not in order, but in silent, unspoken solidarity. They saluted, not because she was a superior officer, not because she was his wife, but because she had done what every one of them had dreamed of doing, but never had the courage to do. She had stood up, and she had shattered the man who thought he owned her. The video, captured by a soldier's phone, hidden in his pocket, recorded without permission, went viral within 3 hours. IKT wasn't a high-quality clip. The camera shook. The audio was muffled. The lighting was poor. But it didn't matter, because in the first 12 seconds, you saw Daniel Rourke raise his hand in the next 1.7 seconds. You saw Elena move in the next 0.3 seconds. You heard the crack. And in the 4.2 seconds after that, you saw 282 grown men and women, hardened by war, reduced to tears. The clip was posted on Reddit, then Twitter, then TikTok, then CNN, then Fox News, then the Pentagon WY noon. It had been viewed over 12 million times WY 3 p.m. The hashtag Shattered his arm but not her spirit was trending worldwide. WY 5 p.m. President of the United States issued a statement. Any act of domestic violence, especially by a person in a position of authority, is an abomination to the values we defend. The Department of Defense will conduct a full, transparent investigation. By 7 p.m., the Army's Inspector General had opened a formal inquiry at BY midnight. Over 800,000 people had signed a petition demanding Daniel Rourke's immediate dismissal and criminal charges. And still, Elena said nothing. She didn't give interviews. She didn't appear on television. She didn't post on social media. She sat in her barracks room, alone, staring at the wall. She had done what she had to do. And now, she waited. The next morning, the base was in chaos. The parade ground had been cordoned off. Crime scene tape fluttered in the wind. Forensic teams combed the ground for trace evidence. The chaplain had been called in to counsel the soldiers. Many were in tears. Some were angry. Others were proud. Elena was summoned to the commander's office. She walked in alone, an O lawyer, an O aide, an O escort. She sat down. Commander General Marcus Holloway, a four-star general with 38 years of service, a Vietnam veteran, a man who had seen too many good soldiers broken by war, sat across from her. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared at her. Then he sighed. "You know," he said quietly, "I've been in this army for almost 4 decades. I've seen men break under pressure. I've seen women break under abuse. I've seen leaders who thought they were above the law. I've seen soldiers who thought they could get away with anything because they wore a uniform." He leaned forward. "But I've never seen anyone do what you did." Elena didn't answer. "I'm not here to punish you," he said. "I'm here to thank you." She looked at him. "Sir, I've been waiting my entire career for someone to do this." He reached into his desk drawer, took out a small, worn photograph. He placed it on the table. It was a black and white image of a young woman in a 1970s military uniform. She stood beside a man in a colonel's uniform, her husband. She was smiling. He had his arm around her, but his hand was clenched. His fingers were digging into her shoulder. The caption underneath read, "Lieutenant Colonel James Holloway and his wife, Lieutenant Karen Holloway, Fort Benning, 1974. General Holloway's voice cracked. "That was my wife." Elena's breath caught. "She never told me," he said. "Not until 1998, after he died. She found the letters, the bruises, the hospital records. She kept them hidden for 24 years. Because she thought if she stayed quiet, it would end. That if she was strong enough, he'd stop." He looked at her. "I didn't know. Not until it was too late." He wiped his eyes. "I spent 15 years of my life thinking I was protecting her. But I was just protecting the image, the uniform, the reputation." He looked at her again. "We didn't just break his arm." He paused. "You broke the silence." The investigation took 11 days. Daniel Rourke was arrested on charges of assault, domestic violence, obstruction of justice, and conduct unbecoming an officer. He was stripped of his rank. His medals were revoked. His pension was frozen. He was court-martialed. His defense team argued that he had lost control, that he was under extreme stress, that he loved his wife, that he was a decorated veteran. Elena's testimony was brief. "I did not provoke him," she said. "I did not insult him. I did not raise my voice. I did not move until he raised his hand to strike me. I defended myself. I used the training I was given to survive. I did not intend to break his arm, but I did not intend to let him hit me." The court-martial lasted 3 days. The jury, composed of 7 senior officers, deliberated for 47 minutes. They found Daniel Rourke guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 18 months in the U.S. disciplinary barracks at Fort Leavenworth He was dishonorably discharged. He was banned from ever wearing a military uniform again. He was ordered to pay $250,000 in restitution to the Army for the cost of the investigation, medical care, and administrative fallout. And he was forced to sit in front of the entire 82nd Airborne Division, stripped of his rank, his medals, his dignity, and apologized. He refused. He sat there, silent, head down, eyes hollow. The soldiers didn't cheer. They didn't boo. They just watched. And when he was led away, no one clapped and no one moved, because they knew this wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. Elena was offered a promotion, a medal, a book deal, a speaking tour. She declined them all. Instead, she requested a transfer to a small, forgotten outpost in the mountains of Colorado, Camp Horseshoe, a remote training facility with no media, no cameras, no press. She wanted to teach. She didn't want to be a symbol. She wanted to be a teacher, she did. She started a program called the Silent Defense. It was open to all service members, male and female, who had ever been afraid to speak up. She didn't teach combat. She taught awareness. She taught boundaries. She taught how to recognize the warning signs of abuse, not just physical, but emotional, psychological, coercive. She taught men how to be allies. She taught women how to stand. She taught everyone that silence isn't strength. Silence is surrender, and surrender is death. Within 6 months, Camp Horseshoe became the most sought-after training site in the military. Soldiers from every branch, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, applied to attend. They came from bases where abuse was whispered about but never addressed. They came from families where men were told, "Don't cry." They came from homes where women were told, "Just be quiet." They came to learn, and they left changed. One soldier, a Marine corporal named Marcus Bell, wrote a letter to Elena after attending the course. "I used to think if I hit my girlfriend, it was just a moment of anger," he wrote. "I thought if she didn't fight back, she didn't deserve better. I thought men like me were strong. I was wrong. You didn't just break his arm. You broke my excuses." Another letter from a 19-year-old female recruit. "I thought I was the only one who felt this way. I thought if I told someone, I'd be labeled weak. I thought I had to take it. I didn't know I had the right to say no. You show me that I do." Elena never replied to any of the letters, but she kept them. All 3,217 of them. She read them every night before she slept. 2 years later, on a rainy afternoon in Colorado, a young woman walked into Camp Horseshoe. She was 20 years old, dark hair, white eyes, a nervous smile. She didn't wear a uniform. She wore a hoodie, jeans, boots. She looked like any other civilian, but she had a scar on her left wrist, a burn from a cigarette. She had been in the Army for 6 months. Her husband, a sergeant, had been abusive. He had locked her in the garage for 3 hours after she cried during a phone call with her mother. He had broken her finger. He had threatened to kill her if she told anyone. She had stayed silent until she saw the video. She had watched it 47 times. She had cried every time. And then she came. She walked into the training center. Elena was standing in the front, wearing a simple green shirt, no rank, no medals. She looked up, and she saw the girl. She didn't say anything. She just walked over. She took off her own shirt. Underneath, she had scars, dozens of them. Burns, bruises, a long, jagged line across her ribs, and a broken collarbone, a surgical scar on her left hip from a fall she took when her husband shoved her down the stairs. She turned around, and she said, "I was you." The girl broke down. She fell to her knees, and she cried. Elena knelt beside her and held her. "I'm not here to fix you," she whispered. "I'm here to remind you. You were never broken. You were just afraid." Today, the Silent Defense has trained over 12,000 service members. IT has been adopted by every branch of the U.S. military. IT has been presented at the Pentagon. IT has been included in the curriculum at West Point and Annapolis. IT has saved lives. IT has broken cycles. IT has changed the culture. And Elena Rourke, she never took a promotion. She never accepted a medal. She never gave a TED Talk. She never wrote a book. She just kept teaching. She lives in a small cabin in the mountains. She grows her own vegetables. She walks her dog every morning. She still wakes up at 4:30 a.m. She still salutes the flag. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, she hears the distant echo of boots on gravel. And she smiles, because she knows, somewhere out there, a young soldier is standing in formation. And when someone tries to touch her, she won't be afraid that she'll move, and she'll break their arm. So here's the truth. This isn't just a story about a woman who defended herself. It's a story about what happens when the system fails, when the powerful abuse the powerless, when the military, an institution built on honor, becomes a cage for the abused. It's about what happens when one person, armed with nothing but courage and training, decides to say, enough. That it's about how silence kills, and how one act of defiance can ignite a revolution. Elena didn't want to be famous. She didn't want to be a hero. She just wanted to live. And in choosing to fight back, she gave millions of others the right to do the same. So, if you're watching this, wherever you are, if you're reading this, if you've ever been afraid to speak up, if you've ever been told to just take it, if you've ever thought you were alone, you're not. She did it. And now it's your turn. Subscribe to Grow for Justice, because justice doesn't shout. It stands. And when it stands, the world has to listen. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, if it made you cry, if it made you feel something, then don't just scroll past. Subscribe. Hit that bell. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching this from? Are you in a military base? Are you in a shelter? Are you sitting in your car, afraid to go home? Are you a soldier? A veteran? A survivor? A parent? A child? Tell us that we're listening, because the next person who needs to hear this might be you, and you're not alone. Grow for Justice, that we don't just talk about change, that we become it. Subscribe now. And if you're watching this, thank you for being here, for not looking away, for standing. That you're not alone, that we're with you always.